Yes, indeed, I had a birthday. I consider myself middle-aged because, as you all know, we're aiming for 120. So that's 40 years young, then 40 years middle-aged, and then 40 years uh, becoming an elder. So I'm not quite there yet in the elder bracket, but here I am. First of all, I thank all of those who have put their cameras on. It is so nice to talk to a face rather than a blank screen. So anybody else who feels in the mood to do that, that'd be grand. Nice to see some faces that I recognize from previous occasions, and even a few names, I guess, as well. So this 3-week program, I am conscious that I'm entering tiger country, and I don't have a gun. That's because I'm from Britain rather than America, so I'm aware that this is a very tricky territory. It's called Making Sense of Israel. But the fact of the matter is that emotions are currently, and always have, but currently even more so, running so high around the topic of Israel that it is really, really hard to try and stand back and be a bit dispassionate about what we know, what we need to know, what has happened, what we think is happening, and so on and so forth in and around Israel. So this 3-week program is in part trying to establish some facts, and I hope all of you looking around, I think none of you is under 20, so you still believe in facts. If you were under 20, you might not believe in facts. You say to somebody, a tree is made of wood, and a young person go, well, that's interesting. I mean, that's your opinion, and you go, no, it's made of wood. And they go, well, that's your reality, but, I mean, there are different views and stuff like that. So I'm going to try and establish some facts. And I'm also going to try and propose, as it were, some directions or some frames. But I'm certainly not going to try and tell you what you ought to think. You bring your own baggage, your own history, your own outlooks, and so forth. And maybe in the third session in particular, I mean, certainly in each session we're going to have a Q&A. It's going to be an opportunity to interchange. But perhaps in the third session in particular, I can hear a little more of your opinions in these matters, so that we can change this into an exchange of views rather than offering some information. So in the blurb, and I don't know how closely you read the blurb that was sent out in relation to this, I said that I was going to ask us just to start off with the meaning or the definition of the word Israel. So when I proposed the title of this, Making Sense of Israel, I imagine all of you immediately assumed that I was talking about the country. I think it highly improbable that any of you immediately assumed that I might be talking about anything else. That talking about making sense of Israel, this is a conversation about a contemporary political reality called the State of Israel, where it is, as we all know, and so on. But let's go back and just look at the word Israel first. The first time the word Israel comes into being, probably all of you will be familiar with the story. As you know, we have the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, those forefathers, those ancestors of the Jewish people. And Jacob, the third of them, who has 12 sons and a daughter, at least one daughter that we know named Dinah, but 12 sons. All of you have seen the play, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. So you all know about Joseph and Benjamin and all that stuff. But this chap, Jacob, you may also be familiar with the fact that he was a twin. He had a brother called Esau. It was a problematic relationship. The whole of the book of Genesis is just a catalogue of family dysfunction. If you want to know how to bring up your children or give advice to your children's children, then just give them a book of Genesis and say, read that, do everything differently, right? Because I mean, it's just really badly done. But there, the ancestor called Jacob has a deeply problematic relationship with his brother Esau. Now, I'm just going to mention this because I think this is important for us, and I'm assuming most people or everybody on this call is a Jew, but those who are not Jews, if there's anybody who's not a Jew on this call, I'm going to be saying us all the time. So forgive me if that feels exclusive or doesn't recognize your reality, but I'm talking as if we're amongst Jews. So the story of Jacob and Esau is highly significant, I think, for Jews, because what we have there is a chap called Esau, who, by the way, gets a very bad press from the rabbis who deal with him very harshly, I think. But if you read the simple text of the Torah, Esau is Isaac's favorite, his father's favorite. He's an outgoing, dynamic, active sort of chap. He's a hunter. He's a fieldsman. He's doing all that stuff, bows and arrows and whatnot. And Jacob is a bit of a homeboy, a mummy's boy maybe. And frankly, if you were going to go out for an evening somewhere, I'm prepared to bet that most of you would rather go out with Esau than go out with Jacob. I think Jacob probably was quite a lot of hard work. Jacob has really, frankly, let's ignore what the rabbis have to say about him, just what the Torah has to say about him. Jacob has very little to recommend him. Esau is really quite kind of dynamic and likable and excitable and oomphy. I think we'd like him. However, on one occasion, first, and there's a struggle between them, and Rebecca gets a prophecy that says, these two are going to struggle. However, on one occasion, Esau is out hunting in the field, and Jacob is at home cooking stew, making soup, whatever it is. Esau comes in and goes, wow, that smells good. This is an approximate translation, right? Esau comes in and goes, wow, that smells good. Can I have some? And Jacob says, and I hope you will agree with me that this is not the typical response when somebody comes into the kitchen and go, wow, that smells good. Can I have some? Jacob says, sell me your birthright. Now, this is a really strange response. If you're familiar with the story, you might not realize quite how strange it is because we're so used to the story. But actually, it is truly weird. Sell me your birthright. I mean, is that what you're thinking about when you're cooking soup? Right? Sell me your birthright. In comes his brother, go, wow, can I have some of that? You go, sell me your birthright. And Esau says, oh, for goodness sake, yeah, whatever. You can have the birthright. Otherwise, I mean, give me the soup anyway. I'm going to die. Now, he's clearly not going to die. Jacob is not withholding life-giving soup, right? Esau is just a passionate man and everything is now. It's existential. It's got to have. I got to have it. Like you would go into the kitchen and go, I'm starving. I need something to eat. Right? You're not starving. It's like something to eat, right? And that's Esau. Everything's on the surface with Esau. With Jacob, everything's not on the surface. It's all deep down. And Esau says, sell me your birthright. Jacob says, all right. Jacob says, sell me your birthright. Esau says, fine, you can have it, whatever, give me the soup. Right? Now, sometime later, Rebecca overhears Isaac saying to Esau, go and get me some venison. That means, say, Esau's got to go out into the field with his bow and arrow or his spear or whatever he does and catch a deer, kill it, right? Butcher it, skin it. I don't know the order. I don't know how one does these things. But, I mean, it's a serious piece of work, right? And then cook it and then bring it to Isaac, his favorite food. All right. Rebecca overhears this and says to Jacob, you're going to lose your blessing? You've got to get in there and get the blessing before Esau. Jacob, being a man of high principle, says, but what if I'm caught? Right? At no point does Jacob say, I can't do that. That's not honest. He doesn't say that. He says, I might get caught. Rebecca says, don't you worry about that. I will solve it. Go round back, get a kid. I'll slaughter it and kill it and prepare it. Right? And you need to get some of Esau's clothes from the cupboard, and I'll give you the skin of the kid to put on your arms, so your arms are hairy, because Esau's hairy and Jacob isn't, and it'll be fine. So sometime later, in goes Jacob with a tray of goat meat. Now, guys, Isaac has said that venison is his favourite food. I'm not a specialist because I'm a vegetarian, but I'm prepared to bet that venison doesn't taste the same as goat meat. Or if it tastes the same, it probably doesn't look the same, right? But one way or another, in comes Jacob with the goat meat and says to Isaac, here is your dish as you requested. Now, I don't know if he puts on a special Esau voice, here is your dish, Dad, as you requested, or what, but Isaac is suspicious. And he asks Jacob to come over to him so he can smell him. He's wearing Esau's clothes, and feel him. He's got the goat skin on his arm. Now, guys, I don't know how hairy Esau was, but however hairy he was, I don't think he can be as hairy as a piece of goat skin. I mean, maybe, I don't know, but it seems improbable. Nevertheless, Isaac feels the goat skin and goes, well, that's all right then. Eats the goat meat without really noticing that it's not venison, and gives Jacob the blessing. Right? Like one of those farces. All right, Jacob goes out one door and in comes Esau with another door with the venison. Here, Dad, I've got your food. And Isaac says, oh dear, I just gave, who was that? Esau immediately realizes who it is and says, I'm going to kill him. And so Jacob does a runner and goes off back to Rebekah's old home to find a wife. Now, most of you are familiar with that story, I'm sure. But what you may not have noticed is that at no point in this story does Jacob say, I am Jacob. Right? He pretends to be Esau. And when he gets to his future father-in-law's home, Laban, and he's asked, who is he? He says, I'm Rebekah's son. He doesn't say, I am Jacob. However, when he gets there, the daughters of Jacob are trying to, Rachel specifically, trying to feed their camels at the well, and they can't move the stone. And Jacob, this is surprising, guys. Jacob single-handedly moves the stone off the well. This is not Jacob behavior. This is Esau behavior. He's the hunky one. Jacob's not the hunky one. Jacob's the homeboy. How come Jacob is hunky when he gets out of the house? They're twins, folks. Remember that Jacob has Esau in him, and quite probably Esau has Jacob in him, but we don't see so much of them. Esau, by the way, marries a couple of local Canaanite women, and Rebekah and Isaac are deeply distressed by this. The minute Esau understands that, he goes off and marries a couple of additional women from the family. Which family? Ishmaelites. He still doesn't get it. Esau doesn't get it, but he is trying to keep his parents happy. He's an emotional man. He wants to keep people happy. Anyway, the story goes on. Jacob grows rich and finally decides to return. And when he decides to return, he's on his way back to his family home, and he is told that Esau is approaching him with 400 armed men. And Jacob is once again immediately Esau's little brother. He is no longer the man who can shift the stone off the well. He's Esau's little brother, and he is scared. And at this point, he does something truly Jewish. And conscious of the fact that most of you are in California and many of you are within a stone's throw of Hollywood, I want to remind you the difference between truly Jewish and Hollywood, right? What Jacob does is he says, I will divide my camp. I will send half of them here and the other half there, so that should we be attacked, at least one half will survive. Now, as you all know, this is not the Hollywood solution to an attack. The Hollywood solution to an attack is to circle the wagons, to fight to the last man, to have a heroic last, Custer's last stand kind of thing. That's the Hollywood glory. Jacob doesn't do any of that. Jacob says, half of us have to survive. It is exceptionally Jewish. And it tells us, it reminds us that Jacob, we may be proud of it, we may not like it, but Jacob is our ancestor. Anyway, he settles down on one side of a little river, going to cross over the next day to see his brother, to meet his brother. And during the night, Jacob gets into a fight with a man. Now, we don't know who this man is. He is later, we suspect, an angel. The rabbis, by the way, rather nicely suggest he is Esau's spirit. That is, within Jacob, there's some kind of struggle going on within himself. Or Esau can project himself in some way. Now, later on, this angel man being person, they struggle all night, grappling and grappling all night. And the sun starts to come up. And the angel man person says, let me go. Because it's dawn, right? This is over. Nobody's prevailed. That's it. Let me go. And Jacob says the most remarkable thing. He says, give me a blessing. Now, this whole story is because he got a blessing from Isaac. Why does he need a blessing? But before that, the angel man person, God being, also says a strange thing. Jacob says, let me go. And the angel being person says, what is your name? Now, you might have thought if you'd spent a whole night grappling with somebody, you might have at least introduced yourselves. But they've been grappling for hours. And finally, at the moment of breaking off, this angel character says to Jacob, what is your name? Who are you? And for the first time in the narrative, Jacob says, I am Jacob. And then he says, give me a blessing. And the angel person, man, whatever he is, says, you will no longer be called Jacob, you will be called Israel, which means he who struggles with God. And the angel expands that, because you have struggled with God and with man and prevailed. Which man has he struggled with? Perhaps himself. But this is the first introduction of the word Israel. The word Israel applies to a person. Now, I bet nobody thought when they saw the title of this thing, Making Sense of Israel, that I was going to be talking about this person. But of course, we're all very familiar with the word in that context, because we all know the phrase, the term, the children of Israel. You might have, without thinking about it too hard, think that it relates to people who came from that place, but it absolutely doesn't. It means people who came from that person. The children of Israel, the Israelites, are those descended from Israel, the man. The 12 tribes of Israel are the 12 tribes that emanate from the 12 sons of the man, Israel. So the first meaning of the word Israel is a person. As we've indicated with the children of Israel and the Israelites and so on, the second meaning of the word becomes the people, the Israelites, the people of Israel. It's currently very popular, isn't it, as a kind of a slogan, to say Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel lives. And that's not about the place. It's about the clan, the tribe, all of us descended from Israel. Now, of course, mostly in America or in Britain, we don't have tribes and clans exactly. But take it from me, for example, in Scotland or something, you might have the MacDonald clan. And that means this whole crowd of people descended from somebody called MacDonald. And they will call themselves the MacDonalds. So, in the same way, the word Israel comes to translate from the person to the people. Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, the Israelites, the children of Israel. Well, that's who we are. If you look in the Bible, you'll see that the place to which they're going when they leave Egypt and make their way to the Promised Land is sometimes called the Holy Land, is sometimes called the Promised Land, and is frequently called Canaan. Um, the idea of calling it Israel is just not something that crops up at all. When King Saul becomes the first king of the Israelites, he doesn't rule over a kingdom called Israel. It doesn't have a name. I think it's a little difficult for us. We're so used now to the political structures we have that we think somehow or other that kings were ruling over a piece of territory, but mostly they were not. They're rather more like, sometimes you see the news about Afghanistan or someplace and you hear about warlords, right? There are warlords there. And what that means is somebody in charge of a bit of territory, but not that it has very precise boundaries, but there's a bunch of people who owe him allegiance or feel associated with him, his guys. And the warlord can kind of command their allegiance, unless, of course, he makes a mistake, in which case they might ditch him and put somebody else in place. Right? And as far as we can tell, in that early time, the land was overrun by the Philistines. The Canaanites have been pretty well squeezed out. The Philistines were dominating the place. The Philistines were a coastal people. Their strongholds were down in the southwest, exactly the area that we're now paying such close attention to in Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, those areas down in the southwest of the land of Israel. And the Philistines came from there, as I say, a coastal people, but they spread out across the land and they dominated the land. Saul becomes the first king. David follows him. And when we say he's king of Israel, we're almost certainly talking about him being king of the people, not the land. David's son is Solomon. I've often said, for the wisest man in the world, he was notably stupid in certain ways. But anyway, Solomon makes a number of serious mistakes and political blunders. And the result of that being that after Solomon dies, Solomon's son only inherits a small part of the allegiance of the people, and the larger group of the people spin off to create their own kingdom. The smaller part, which is by the Jewish narrative, the authentic part, the bit that has the authentic king, that is the Davidic line, the authentic temple, that is the one in Jerusalem, the authentic priesthood, that is the one descended from Aaron, that group establish a kingdom called Judah. And it's called Judah, presumably, because the biggest tribe, the dominant tribe, and of course the tribe of King David, is Judah. Right? You also have the tribe of Benjamin, which is the tribe from which Saul came, and you have the tribe of Levi, which of course is responsible for looking after the temple. So they're going to be there anyway. The bigger group, the more prosperous group, breaks off into a northern kingdom, and they establish a new priesthood, which is not authentic. They establish a new temple, which is not authentic, and a new king, which is not Davidic. And that northern kingdom is called Israel, the kingdom of Israel. let's get a historical pin on it, that's around 950 or so BCE. So about 1,000 years before the Common Era, something like that. So around 3,000 years from back from now. All right, so that's the first time we hear Israel referred to as a place, as a kingdom, and to differentiate it from the authentic, the true one, which is Judah. All right. Again, if you know your history, you'll know that that kingdom of Israel was overrun in the year 722 BCE by the Assyrians, and that those 10 tribes were taken off and scattered all over the world, and are now to be found on a number of reservations in the United States. Right? There are lots of suggestions as to where these 10 lost tribes are to be found. We've got them in Wales as well. They're also in Africa. My goodness, they've been fecund and fertile. They've spread out all over the world. There are 10 lost tribes. We don't know where they are. I see a couple of questions. Which tribe are the Spanish Jews from? Well, let's just, the Spanish Jews have no identity in this narrative yet. The Sephardim come much later. They're medieval. So we've got to run about 2,000 years ahead of the period we're talking about to get to Spanish Jews. Okay, so let's also then run forward in history a little bit. The kingdom of Israel disappears, is overrun by the Assyrians, leaving behind the little rump state, which is tiny, not rump state, which is tiny, the kingdom of Judah. And that will be overrun by the Babylonians in due course. In the early 6th century, the temple will be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BCE. So that's nearly 2,600 years since, more than 2,600 years from now. I can see lots of questions about the Mizrahim and the Moroccans and whatnot. Guys, this is all the wrong time. We're being anachronistic here. The period we're talking about, we haven't got anywhere near rabbis, let alone Ashkenazim and Sephardim and all that lot, right? We haven't got the Talmud, we haven't got the Midrash, we haven't got any of that stuff. We're still in biblical times. We're in the prophets, Isaiah, that bunch, right? Jeremiah, Micah, I don't know, whoever your favorite is. That crowd is what we're in. The temple still, well, at this moment, the temple isn't standing because it's destroyed by the Babylonians, but 70 years later, it'll be rebuilt. So we've got a period of time of about 1,000 years from King Solomon, who built the temple, to the Romans, when they destroyed it in the year 70 or so, around the time of Jesus, near enough. That 1,000 years, we have a temple in Jerusalem with a brief hiatus, a couple of generations, about 70 years, when we haven't got a temple. There is nothing in the United States to match that. Okay, just remember, guys, nothing in the United States that you can point to and say there's a building that's been there for 1,000 years, or even there's an institution that's been there for 1,000 years, right? There may be something in Native American culture, I don't know, but certainly not amongst the kind of post-native culture invasion of America, 1492, whatever it is, that you could point to with this kind of longevity or presence. The temple's destroyed by the Babylonians. It's rebuilt a couple of generations later. We have the temple back in Jerusalem. It's around this time that the Jews start experimenting with something like a synagogue. 200, 300, 400 years later, we've got something more developing like a synagogue. The diaspora has come into being insofar as there are Jews still living in Babylon, even though there's Jews still living back in the land of Israel. But even though we're talking about the land of Israel now, the kingdom or the territory is not called Israel, it's called Judah. Why? Because that's what it was. They want to get back to Judah. Why is it called Judah? Well, like I say, probably the leading tribe was Judah, and therefore it was named after the leading tribe, and indeed the tribe of King David. We know from the book of Esther, which is from about 2,500 years ago, that in Persia, Mordecai is described as a Jew. This is virtually the first time the word Jew is used in the Bible. It's also referred to elsewhere once, but that's kind of the main place we first hear it. He's called Ish Yehudi, a man of Judah, or a Judan man, we might call it. But we're told he's from the tribe of Benjamin, right? So we can see that by this time, anybody who comes from that kingdom is called a Yehudi, a Judan, regardless of which particular tribe he's from. And this is where the word Jew emerges, right? And the Jews in Babylon want to come back to the land of Israel. I see a question about Samaria. The Sumerians come into being at around this time. We think possibly they're kind of some hybrid folk left behind when the Jews are taken off into captivity to Babylon. Others stayed behind and created perhaps their own slightly divergent take on Jewish life. So when the Jews came back from Babylon, they found these Samaritans there. The Samaritans go, well, we're basically your cousins. And Jews, as we always do, go, well, I don't think so. I don't think you're our kind of people. We can't possibly include you. You'll have to join another school, or whatever they said, right? And from then on, there were daggers drawn, the Samaritans and the Jews. And Jews, that was the first opportunity for the Jews to be truly snooty about another group. We haven't stopped doing it ever since. So there we are with that story. As we know, and I'm fast forwarding quickly, by the time we get to Roman times, the place the Jews are living in is called Judea. Again, it's the Latin term for Judah. It's the Judan name, the Latin name of where the Jews live. It's Judea. Nobody calls it Israel. It's Judea. Of course, there are other sort of sub-provinces of the territory. We have Samaria, which is part of what was the Northern Kingdom, but there are no, it's no longer dominated by Jews. Samaria, and we have Galilee, right up in the northeast, Galilee. And those of you familiar with the New Testament will know that Jesus is said to have come from Galilee, from Nazareth, in order to manage the narrative in a manner which reinforces his messianic claim. We're told that he was born in Bethlehem, which is, of course, in Judea, right? And then he finishes his life in Jerusalem, which is, of course, in Judea. And the Romans, the Pontius Pilate and that lot, spend a lot of time shuttling back and forth, going, I don't think he's my business, I think he's your business, sending him backwards and forward to Galilee and Judea, trying to decide where he belongs. Okay, so this is where we get the, I've just seen Ahuva say that there were only 9 tribes in the Northern Kingdom because the Southern Kingdom contained Judah, not Shimon, Judah, Levi, and Benjamin. But here's a nice piece of Jewish maths. We've got 12 tribes of Israel. We've got 3 in the north and the famous 10 lost tribes in the, 3 in the south, and the famous 10 lost tribes in the north, making 12 tribes in total. Yes, 3 and 10 makes 12. That's Jewish money. And the reason is because, of course, in the north, really what we've got is 8 2/2 tribes, because there's never a tribe of Joseph. There's his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So it's really 8 2/2. So Ahov is absolutely right that really it's the descendants of 9 sons, but we call it 10 tribes. Okay, anyway, there we are. Somebody's already challenging me on contemporary politics. I'm going to put that aside for a minute. Let's stay with the Bible. It's safer. We've got the Jews in Roman times. They're in Judea. And the Jews are, as you might not be surprised to know, revolting, right? The Jews revolt all the time. And they give the Romans quite a hard time. 2 or 3 revolts. One is conducted by the Jews all around the Roman Empire. That's in the early stages of the 2nd century, in about 117 or so. But prior to that, there is the famous Jewish revolt, the Jewish War, which takes place in and around the land of Israel, not called the land of Israel, but in and around the land of Israel, which gives rise eventually to the destruction of the temple in the year 70. Now, many of you may have a kind of loose sense of the history of the Jewish people, that the temple is destroyed and the Jews are expelled from the land of Israel and scattered all over the world, right? But of course, what's rather interesting is that they may have been scattered all over the world, but 60 years later, they're revolting in the land of Israel again. How can that be if they were scattered all over the world? Well, they weren't. They were not really much allowed back into Jerusalem, but they largely stayed around the land of Israel. And of course, by now, the Philistines are a dead letter. They've gone. The Philistines are no longer relevant. There aren't any Philistines in sight. We're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years as different tribes and subgroups move on, okay? So it's not surprising that the Philistines have disappeared. And indeed, when the Jews move, when they can't any longer sustain Jerusalem, you may know the famous story of the rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who asks for the scholarship centers and the rabbis of Yavne. And Yavne is down there in the southwest, just on the borders now of Gaza, down there in ancient Philistine territory, right? And this became the relocation of the Sanhedrin in Roman times. But don't worry yourselves about that. 60 years later, the Jews of the land of Israel are once again revolting under the leadership of a chap called Bar Kokhba, and they really shake the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is not expecting this. It's badly knocked off its feet by the Jewish revolt. By the way, having just suffered a similar shocking revolt, which leads to the destruction of large numbers of Roman soldiers in Britain. In Britannia, there is a warrior queen called Boudica. Some of you may know her as Boadicea. I don't know if this is of any part of American history, but Boadicea or Boudica leads a revolt against the Romans, and the Romans are terribly shocked by this, and it takes them a good long while to get a grip, and send in reinforcements, grab hold of things, massacre the ancient Britons, and reassert control. So therefore, when the Bar Kokhba revolt starts up in the land of Israel, right, still not called the land of Israel, Judea, Galilee, Samaria, right? When it kicks off there, the Romans are having none of this. And once they've kind of recovered their balance, as it were, they get the bloke from Britain and they send him across to the land of Israel. And instead of fighting like they did in the Jewish wars in the 60s and 70s, and sort of fighting every battle wherever they could, this guy starts in the north of the land, south of Galilee, and works his way down, destroying village, town, every man and boy he can find, throwing into slavery every girl and woman he can find, right? And basically scorched earth policy, right? And slowly but surely completely wiping out Jewish life in the territories, much of what we now think of as contemporary Israel. Of course, nobody is talking about the Negev desert. Nobody's interested in that. South of Beersheba, nobody's paying any attention to it. It's a desert. Okay, let's just remind ourselves that when the Israelites came out of Egypt, how did they enter the land of Israel? You'll remember they crossed the Jordan. Now, I don't know if you have a mental picture of the geography of this, but in order to cross the Jordan into the land of Israel, you have to be standing in contemporary Jordan, right? You all got that mental image? You've got to be standing in contemporary Jordan. These guys came from Egypt, which is on the other side of the land of Israel, right? They spent 40 years meandering about in the Sinai. But in order to get to the other side of the Jordan, the river Jordan, in order to cross into the land of Israel, they must have walked through the Negev, right? Yeah, you all got the geography in your mind? They must have walked through the Negev. When they walked through the Negev, nobody said, hey, we're in Israel, right? Because nobody thought that. They were just carrying on through the wilderness, which is basically much the same as the Sinai, uninhabited land, right? And then finally they turn left, kind of up into what is contemporary Jordan and Moab and so on and so forth, and then are ready to cross into the land. So nobody's talking about the Negev. Nobody's interested in that. That's not a place anybody's fighting any battles over or showing any interest in, right? The land of Israel is largely what we might call the central block. So Galilee is a whole other thing under different political management. Still Roman, but different political management. We're talking about the center block of Israel, right? In contemporary terms, we're largely talking about what today, depending on your political stance, you would call the West Bank, or the disputed territories, or the occupied territories, or Judea and Samaria, right? Whatever. That bit of land, that bite chunk that Israel won in 1967, which had previously been occupied by Jordan and contains not least half of Jerusalem, and is part of the sort of Palestinian territories under the Palestinian Authority, and goes across basically to the Mediterranean coast and includes things on the Mediterranean coast, although of course those towns mostly didn't exist at the time. Tel Aviv and so on weren't there, but Ashkelon was down in the southwest. Haifa was up in the northwest, that Mediterranean coast. That's the land we're talking about, and that was destroyed and emptied following the Bar Kokhba revolt. And the Romans basically said, Jews are not allowed back in here. This is no longer Jewish land. It cannot be Jewish land. And indeed, we are going to rename it. It will never again be called Judea. It will be named after the ancient biblical enemies of the Jews. We will call it Syria Palestina. We will name it after the Philistines. And so this land became known as Syria Palestina, and of course Syria included bits of a Roman province north of the land, and of course Latin then becoming the dominant language of scholarship and maps and so on and so forth. It's not surprising that this territory became universally known by anybody who wanted to describe territory or do geography or find a place as Palestina or Palestine. And that became the name of this land for the next nearly 2 millennia, right? And no surprise in that. It was, of course, intended as an offense, as an insult to the Jews, and it was. Anybody who tells you, I don't know how many of you are involved in Jewish-Christian dialogue, I hope some of you are involved in Jewish-Christian interfaith activities, but anybody who tells you that Jesus was a first-century Palestinian Jew needs to be put right. First of all, of course, because I think, generally speaking, he's called the Galilean or the Nazarene, which was not in Palestine anyway. It was in Galilee, out of this territory. But anyway, the land was not called Palestine until about 100 years after Jesus died. There is no way that Jesus could have been a Palestinian Jew because Palestine didn't exist, right? You could call him a Judean Jew, which is a little arguable, but certainly a Galilean Jew would work, if you like. Nazarene, it's a frequent term used because he was from Nazareth, but definitely not a Palestinian Jew. That, of course, is an anachronism, just the same as you guys asking me about the Jews of Morocco or something, when Morocco didn't exist back in the days I'm talking about. So the word Israel is already somewhat contested. Right? What are we talking about when we talk about Israel? We're talking about a person, a people, or a place. If we want to say that the land of Israel is the Holy Land or the Promised Land, we then have to ask ourselves, okay, what does it include? The Bible makes various suggestions as to where the boundaries of the Promised Land are. Maximally, it claims that the Promised Land goes virtually from the River Nile to virtually the River Euphrates. This is a huge territory, which would include Sinai, the land of Israel, much of Jordan, up into Syria, possibly Lebanon, and up into Iraq. Right? I don't think any Jew has ever realistically aspired to having this territory, although there have been times in biblical history, especially in Solomon and also at the time of the Maccabees, when they held a fair proportion of that territory, or were in strong political alliance with the people who held those territories. But I don't think any Jew nowadays, there must be a few maximalists around, but I don't think the majority of Jews nowadays would suggest, for example, that Sinai is an essential part of the Promised Land or the Holy Land or anything. So where is Israel? And I'm going to finish with this because we like to think we've got some kind of clarity on this, and then we haven't at all. Imagine an archer's target. Okay, you know, got bullseye in the middle, and then a ring around the outside, and another ring around the outside of that. Okay, imagine that. Where, if we're going to talk about the Holy Land, let's start with the holiest possible spot in the Holy Land. No dispute about this, chaps, because of its very name. It must be the Holy of Holies. Right? The Kadosh Kadoshim, you can't have a holier spot than the Holy of Holies, right? No dispute about that. Where is the Holy of Holies? We don't know exactly. Somewhere on the Temple Mount. Some people suspect it's where the Dome of the Rock is. Some people suspect it isn't. Some people, you know, I mean, who knows? Nobody knows. So the Holy of Holies is our bullseye, holy-wise, right? But we don't know exactly where it is. What is the next ring? Is, of course, the Holy Temple. That's obvious. What are the boundaries of the Holy Temple? We have no idea. Because the Western Wall, we know, was built by Herod in order to show off. I can see Clifford Cornell is there at the Western Wall, right? The Western Wall, built by Herod to show off, was built outside the precinct of the pre-existing temple, which had been built by Ezra, right? Because Herod made the precinct of the temple bigger. So is the temple, the holy territory of the temple, just inside that wall or just outside that wall? Where exactly is the precinct of the temple? Where are the boundaries of it? Right? The walls we have now include all kinds of stuff that was not temple as such. So we know that the Holy of Holies is the holiest spot. We know that the Holy Temple is the Bet HaMikdash, the holy place, but we don't know the boundaries of that. Okay, what's the next ring of our dartboard, of our target practice? Is, of course, the Holy City, Ir HaKodesh, Jerusalem, right? The indivisible capital of the Jewish people. Where is the indivisible capital's borders? We don't know, right? Which bit is the indivisible capital? If Jerusalem continues to sprawl until it finally hooks up with Tel Aviv, is Tel Aviv now suddenly part of the indivisible capital of the Jewish people? Right? Is one of the new suburbs of Jerusalem part of the indivisible capital of the Jewish people? What is Jerusalem? Are we talking about the old city of David? We don't know where the exact boundaries of that are. Are we talking about the bit within the walls of Jerusalem? They were built by the Turks, right? So where is this boundary? And the next ring, of course, is the Holy Land. And like we've already established, we don't know the boundaries of that either. So we have an impeccable, precise, conceptual structure for the holiness of the world. Holy of Holies, Bet HaMikdash, Holy Temple, Ir HaKodesh, Holy City, the Holy Land, the rest of the world. By the way, I hope you all know that there is nothing more holy about California than anywhere else on the planet, except the land of Israel. Okay, so everywhere else is the same. That's the conceptual thing, but we have no sense of the boundaries. So I'm going to stop there. We now have established that we can talk about the land of Israel, but we can't be very precise about it. And next week, we are going to talk about the land of Israel and not be very precise about it. Okay. And we'll bring things up to date next week into contemporary politics. That is how the land of Israel comes into being, exactly why these and those bits of Israel fall under Israeli government control, as it were. And then in the third week, we'll go much more into our current circumstances and what seems to be going on there, whether there is any way forward, and if so, what that might look like. Okay. Shirel, you're going to pick up some of these things?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much. And I will note that some people wrote to you directly and some to me. So
right, okay, yes.
So if you see ones you'd like to pick up from your end, please do so. And in the meantime, I'll ask a few over here. So one is, I mean, you detailed very deeply the Israeli and the Jewish. Does the word and term Hebrew of our ancestors play any role in your eyes in this story?
Okay, thank you. So the word Hebrew is a term which is applied to Abraham. So very first guy, Hebrew is a word applied, Ivri. We don't know exactly what it means. Some people suspect it relates to some kind of crossing over or passing over, because over is over, like the word implies. But we don't really know that. That's a speculation. Maybe he is the man who passed over from one place to another. But he is called an Ivri. He's called a Hebrew. And therefore, it is very authentic to call the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob Hebrews. Now, we shouldn't forget, of course, that as far as Muslims are concerned, they too are at least spiritually descended from Ibrahim, the same man. Spiritually, I say, they don't argue that they have a family connection necessarily. They're not looking for a kind of bloodline, as Jews might. Jews see ourselves as a clan, as a tribe, and of course people can convert, but that's a bit like kind of in-laws. You know, people join a family, but it's a family. Muslims see Ibrahim as the first kind of coherent Muslim, I suppose you would say, and therefore they see Ishmael, his son, as also inheriting that tradition. But they don't ever call themselves Hebrews or Ivrim. That's a term which is reserved for the Bible. Yehudim, Jews, as I've indicated, comes from the Bible and comes from the tribe of Judah and the kingdom of Judah, right? And we can be pretty sure that Jews were being called Jews from about the 5th century BCE. We have it in the Bible from the book of Esther, for example. Israelites, of course, is an even more ancient term for the Jews. And did you mention something else, Shirel?
No, I think that kind of answers that question.
Yeah.
There was a question here about the coins from the time of Bar Kokhba relating to the land of Israel, right. And about that.
So in the time of Bar Kokhba, as I said, it was a really very briefly a very successful revolt. So much so, and Bar Kokhba was perhaps a little hubristic, and that might have been part of his problem. He was so confident that he was going to win, and a lot of people thought he was messianic and invested in him, not least the famous Rabbi Akiva, thought that Bar Kokhba could be the Messiah. Bar Kokhba minted coins for his newly declared independent kingdom. And so there are coins from the Bar Kokhba revolt, even though in fact his independent kingdom only existed for a couple of years. And then it was wiped out and people, like I say, were massacred. It is almost certainly the most catastrophic destruction of Jews at any point in Jewish history up to, and I would be prepared to make an argument for, including the Holocaust, but certainly up to the Holocaust. And what is truly remarkable is how little Jewish history and the rabbis and our traditions pay any attention to it. It's almost like the rabbis kind of averted their eyes. By this time, there are rabbis around, like I said, Rabbi Akiva and so on. It's almost as if they looked away. Guys, don't dwell on this. We don't need to think about it. let's move on. We should not get into this messianic stuff. We should not try and revolt. There's nothing clever about this. We nearly died. We're back to Jacob splitting the camp, right? Fortunately, there's a diaspora in existence to keep the Jews going when the Jews are wiped out of the land of Israel, pretty well most of the land of Israel. Many of those rabbis took refuge up in Galilee, which is why those of you who visited Israel will know that up around Tiberias and so on, you see lots of the tombs of rabbis from Mishnaic and Talmudic times. They were up there because they couldn't be further south. So yeah.
I'm going to try and squeeze in two more questions, one very concrete and one might need a little more. Michael is asking, was there any part of the land once known as Judah, also called Israel, prior to the modern times?
Sorry, was there
any part of the land prior to modern times that was referred to as Israel?
Well, like I say, the ancient kingdom of Israel, which was the kingdom of the 10 tribes in the north, what I call the inauthentic kingdom, as it were, was called the Kingdom of Israel. And we do have some records, a couple of memorial stones that archaeologists have found that refer to kings of Israel. Perhaps one of the most famous of them is Ahab, but by no means the only one, but kings of Israel. So clearly there was that place which was called Israel, but it's kind of interesting that it isn't the one that sustained continuity amongst the Jews. The bit that sustained continuity and led to us being called Judans was the southern kingdom, which was called Judah. And I think it would be fair to argue that the more authentic word for the land and the people is Jews and Judah. When we come a little more up to date, we'll discuss why the state of Israel was called Israel, therefore, and not something else. But it was not obvious by any means to anyone that you would be bound to call a Jewish country Israel. If you'd asked people, say, 200 to 300 years ago, imagine we could have a Jewish country, what would you call it? I don't think Israel would come in their sort of top 3 choices. They would all cluster around some word like Judah. Probably. I'm speculating here. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. It's I don't know if you're seeing there any pressing questions that you want to answer. We can definitely take another minute or two.
Well, a mention has been made. I did say that the word Yehudim appears elsewhere in the Bible, not just in the Book of Esther, and I had it pointed out to me that it is in Jeremiah as well. There's also written that Israel is mentioned in Meneptah's stele of around 1280 BCE. I think this is very interpretive, and I think this is there's a certain amount of wishful thinking on that. To be frank, there's a lot of back reading because we have a lot of history which we know not least from the Bible. There's a lot of coming across archaeological things and saying, oh well, this must be, or this probably is, or I imagine this refers to. But I'm not convinced that Israel, other than the Israelites, certainly not the place. So Meneptah might be referring to the people. I'm not convinced entirely that he would have been engaged with the slave people called the Israelites. But if he was, he would have referred to the Israelites. Certainly, he wouldn't have been referring to the land of Israel because, by biblical narrative anyway, the Israelites don't get into the land of Israel till around that time, around 1280 BCE, a bit later. So I don't think he's referring to the place. I note too, sorry, folk have sent me private things, and I note that there's at least one Christian on the call, so I hope I haven't misrepresented Christianity too grimly. I've tried not to. And I also note that Evelyn is understandably concerned about Moroccan Jews. And as I say, Moroccan Jews, to the best of our knowledge, don't appear in the narrative at all till probably about the year, possibly edging in through Romans, through Spain, or along North Africa. It's not very clear. Might be more probably with the Muslim expansion in around the 7th century. So as Muslims spread across the world, they probably take with them Jews, or Jews follow pretty quickly. That's most likely when they get there, well before medieval times, of course. So a long established.
And with like a question that might take us also kind of over to next week, and maybe also a more personal one. But for you, why is it important to start a series about Israel the way you started it today? Because most people would have jumped in directly, and yet you chose to take quite a step back. And if you can share why you find it important or to start the conversation in this way.
Because, folks, we're bedeviled by a lack of perspective, right? We need historical perspective. When we get involved in discussions about contemporary disputes about Gaza or Palestinians or Israel or anything else, when we meet our interlocutors, those who stand on the other side of the argument, they have no historical perspective. So let me give you a very simple example, Sherelle. Whenever a visiting dignitary turns up in Israel, the first thing they do is they whip them off to Yad Vashem, right? And it doesn't matter who they are and how long they're there for. They can be for 25 minutes. They got to spend 20 minutes in Yad Vashem. And they walk around Yad Vashem and they are heartbroken and shattered by the experience, quite rightly so. And the Israelis believe that this will lead them to say, this is terrible. Of course Israel should exist. This justifies its existence, right? Now, folks, imagine that I turn up in America and I'm a little skeptical about whether the USA should exist, right? So straight away, you take me off to the, I don't know, to the Mayflower or something, and you show me the suffering of the Puritans, right? Then I meet up with some Native Americans, and they take me to their reservation somewhere, and they tell me the story of their hardships. Now, what do I feel now about the USA? I come away thinking, well, I mean, yes, it's true, it's terrible for the Mayflower. I understand the Puritans needed somewhere, but they got it at the expense of these poor characters. And they're not living a good life because we just, we took it. Now, if these visiting dignitaries were taken to Hebron and marched into the cave of Machpelah and were shown the tombs of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah, and told, this is the ancestral Jewish land. We are the Aboriginal people of the Middle East. There is no group in this territory that can claim its history back as far until you go to Egypt, which is not Arab, or Iran, which is not Arab. The Persians and the Egyptians also have ancient history like the Jews. We are the Aboriginal people of the Middle East. Now, do you see why we're here? That's a different kind of narrative to, look, we just want you to sympathize with the grim experience we had in the Holocaust. The Holocaust was grim, but it doesn't prove any reason why the Jews should be in the land of Israel. It just shows the Jews need a haven. But, there was experiment with Uganda. There's a marvelous book about the Jews taking over a bit of Alaska. All right? That, why the land of Israel? They should take them to the tomb of the cave of Machpelah. But nobody does that. So as a result, there's no historical perspective. There's no discussion to be had. Somebody or other mentioned the Palestinians and so on. I'm not going to get into that. But there's a great story. I'm finished with the joke, right? Somebody says, there's a dispute about who owns the land, whether it should be the Palestinians or the Jews or whatever. They go, well, do you know that story in the Bible? I go, what story in the Bible? He said, well, Moses goes swimming. He folds his clothes up neatly on the side of the river, and he goes swimming. And when he comes back, his clothes have gone. They've been stolen by the Palestinians. I mean, we've always had this trouble with Palestinians. You go, what do you mean Palestinians? There weren't any Palestinians in those days. You go, right? You've got to get some historical perspective. And that's why I think we've got to go back and ask ourselves, what are we doing in this place? How do we come to this place? What is this place? Because if we want to argue for an absolute Jewish right, we need to know why we're claiming it. Do we have a right to be in the Negev? Right? And we also need to factor in where the Palestinians come from, who they are, and what they're about too. Right? The former chief rabbi of the UK, Lord Jacobowitz, once said, "Two rights often make a wrong." And that might be the territory we're in. But at the very least, we need to be sure of our ground and not just know stuff from the last 150 years. That is not what history consists of.
Clive, thank you very, very much. Looking forward to see where you take us in this journey in the next two parts of this series. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We're looking forward to seeing you in our future online programs, and have a good day, good evening, good night, wherever you are right now. להתראות. תודה רבה.
Good night all. Or rather, good afternoon.